Everyone, this is Anoop Kumar. We are on episode 15 of Is This a Dream? Hard to believe it's come this far. So we are still on chapter Where Does Consciousness Go When I Die? This is chapter 4 of Is This a Dream? And let me know if you can hear me, if the audio and video are coming through okay. Just give me a heads up. Okay, so this is the book that we're looking at. It is available on Amazon. Please do leave a review if you are reading it, if you've read the book. And I'll wait for a few of the chat messages to come in. Usually it takes a few moments. Okay, great. All right, looks like it's coming through. I see it's through on Facebook, through on YouTube. All right, LinkedIn. Okay, great. Happy Tuesday. Happy Tuesday. To Felicia, Shilpi, hello. Invictus, doing well. Andrea. Namaste to Elvira from Romania. All right. So welcome to episode 15 of Is This a Dream? As everyone starts coming in, let's take a few moments that we'll spend together in silence. Take some full and easy breaths. People are logging in. All kinds of things are happening. You're hearing this voice. Let all of it settle in and be contextualized in your awareness. Breathe fully. And let this awareness of yours now be contextualized, now be seated in this broader field of awareness, which holds our individual awareness, which holds the body, which holds relationships, objects, space and time. Relax into your deeper nature. All right. Good to see you all. So we are on Where Does Consciousness Go When We Die? And actually somebody asked this question last week, which is the very simple question. What is it that continues after death? Right? What is it that continues after death? So when we look at death, what do we mean by death? Of course, death is the stopping of the movement of the body. Right? At least at the macroscopic level. The stoppage of macroscopic movement is what we call death. Right? What does that mean? That means that the heart is no longer beating. That macroscopic movement is no longer there. Right? The body is no longer moving. The lungs are no longer moving. When all of these stop, and even the electricity is not firing, the nerves are not firing. So when all of these movements stop, this is what we call death. In fact, this is how we diagnose death if someone dies in the hospital, right? Check the heart. So check the cardiac circulation, check the respiratory effort, see if there's any movement of the lungs, see if there's any activity, and we even check the movement of the cornea in terms of the corneal reflex. Not the movement of the cornea, but the sensation from the cornea stimulates the blinking reflex, right? So when all of these stop, this is associated with what we call death. So the question here is, what is it that continues after death, right? Is there some movement that continues after death? Yes, there are actually a couple movements. Even after death, for example, the body still dematerializes, right? We call it the decomposition of the body. There's still movement there. At the atomic level, at the molecular level, movement continues in the body. At the macroscopic level, movement stops, but at the subatomic level, movement continues, right? The electrons are still circulating. The atoms of the body are still present. So there's still movement. There's still vibrations. So that's still happening at the body level. And at a deeper level, beyond the physicality, the personality continues, right? And now I'm not speaking from the perspective of my medical training, right, in allopathic medicine. I'm speaking more from experience and from philosophy, which is that what we call the body, right, this physical structure, is a vehicle for expression. Yeah, what we call this body is a vehicle for expression, which is why each of us has unique bodies. We all look different, we sound different, we have different interests, right? Most people in this conversation, we have similar interests, at least in this field. Generally speaking, everyone has their own unique interests, unique expressions, and so the body is unique. Just like each of our cars is different, right? One person has a red car, a blue car, white car, black car, gray car, different models, small cars, big cars, SUVs, sports cars, electric car, on and on and on. Innumerable cars. We can keep building infinite cars without one looking like the other. It's only our imagination. Similarly, the bodies that we have are vehicles for expression, right? And you will see that the mind is reflected through the body, right? So a person who's mentally wants to be very strong, they want to be able to move things, they want to be resistant. Many times the body will be in the gym and you will see the body build up, right? Either for offensive or defensive purposes, that body will build up, right? So the body reflects the mind. The body is the vehicle for the mind. So therefore, what happens when your car from, let's say, the year 2000 that's been running for 20 years, when it finally runs out of steam, not runs out of gas, but the parts have come apart, right? Then we move on to the new model. We get a different model. Why? Because in order to express here in this sphere, in this frame of space-time that we're experiencing now, there has to be some kind of vehicle for expression, right? So what continues between your 2000 model car and your 2020 model car that you just got? What continues? It's you, the personality, that is driving that vehicle, right? If somebody says, well, you always had that red car. For 20 years, all I saw you was in that red car. And now if you happen to be driving a blue car, people won't recognize you, right? They'll say, well, that's not you. You got a blue car, you know. You were associated with the red car, right? Or if we're so focused on the car that we only say, well, this person began when they bought the car in 2000 and they ended when they bought the car in 2020. Doesn't make any sense, right? You are not limited by the vehicle you drive. At least not absolutely. You are relatively limited by and relatively conditioned by the vehicle you drive, how fast you can go, maybe how long you can drive, right? How comfortable you may be, the kinds of maneuvers you can perform in the car. In these ways, we are conditioned by the car. But fundamentally, when the car stops, we don't stop. And similarly, the body is the car, the vehicle of expression. So when that body stops moving at the macroscopic level, if the mind, and here I'm not talking about the second mind, I'm speaking about the first mind. I'm speaking about the mind that has tendencies, desires, right? Needs, a sense of wanting to express in some way. This kind of internal momentum in the first mind. This kind of momentum of that mind gathers to it the appropriate vehicle for expression. And that's what we call another body. Right? That's what we call reincarnation, a very fancy sounding term and often an off-putting term because people think reincarnation has to do with religion or spirituality, but it doesn't. Right? If sitting here and having a conversation and having dinner and looking at your body and using your body in different ways, if that's just everyday life, if there's nothing fundamentally religious about that, then there's nothing fundamentally religious or spiritual about using another body. Unfortunately, in this society, that kind of insight and that kind of practice is not commonplace, or if it is, you have to kind of push it off into the corner, and so it becomes spiritual or it becomes religious. But these are facts of life that are open for anyone to discover. So, the key is the internal impressions, the tendencies, the desire to want something, to know something, to express in a particular way, to share something. For any of these reasons, if these desires are there, then when the vehicle is no longer suitable to express that, that collection of intentions proceeds. It cannot be limited by the stoppage of the movement of the body. Right? Another way to say it is the death of the body is not the death of the mind. Which is why in Vedanta, they talk about moksha or liberation. And liberation is not death of the body. In fact, death of the body is seen as the beginning of another cycle, the beginning of another expression. Moksha is liberation from being dependent on a vehicle for expression, for being oneself. Right? So those internal impressions, they continue even when the body stops moving. And they accumulate whatever vehicle is needed for subsequent expression. So what is it that continues after death? These mental impressions, these tendencies, these desires. Right? Now some people talk about soul, talk about the word soul, and it really depends what you mean by this. Right? We can say that as part of human nature, that there's a part of us that is expressing now through this particular mind, this particular body, right? Through the first mind, there's a part of what we are that expresses as the first mind or as some kind of distinct body and distinct mind, right? And as that expression finishes, another kind of expression can come forth. So some people say, well, that's the soul. There is a soul that expresses itself in aliquots, right? Almost like in the lab where you have a pipette and then you release some liquid here, and then you release some liquid here, and then you release some liquid here. So it's like lifetime, lifetime, lifetime. You can look at it as if you look at 1 week, right? Part of you expresses on Monday, goes back. Expresses Tuesday, goes back. Wednesday, goes back. Thursday, Friday. In this way, throughout the week, it's you. However, it's different expressions of you in aliquots, in certain measures. Right? Similarly, what people call a soul is something that is not restricted to a particular lifetime, but expresses itself through lifetimes, so long as it has those individual desires and expressions and wants. And this is why in so many traditions, there is such a focus on the mind and not only on the body. Because we can make the body nice, we can make the body beautiful, we can do many things with the body, and that is nice to do. And simply by doing that, it doesn't address the rest of what's happening, the actual impulse that is behind the body, the impulse that appears as a body externally. Right? So this is why self-reflection, mindfulness, meditation, getting to know the internal drives, getting to recognize the subtler movements and the deeper layers of identity that bloom within the frame of a lifetime. Let's take a deep breath. Okay, next question is, silent chanting is said to be more effective than chanting aloud. Is this true? Chanting is a way of collecting the mind's rays, of bringing the mind to a particular point, right? I think in the last talk we discussed this, so please check that out, episode 14, I believe, or episode 13. But chanting collects the mind and brings it to a certain point. So what's the difference between chanting aloud and chanting silently? Well, it depends on how sensitive and stable the mind is, right? We're talking about the first mind here, the individual mind. Chanting helps this individual mind to collect its many rays, its divergent rays, and bring them together, right? And until that has reached a certain level of stability, until the first mind has reached a certain level of stability, audible chanting is helpful because it gives it that friction that acts on the mind to bring it together. It's almost like a bicycle. When you pedal the bicycle, the chain is pulled by the spikes on the wheel, right? I don't know what it's called, the gear or the wheel, the circle around which the bicycle chain goes. That has spikes on it, and that's how it lodges in with the bicycle chain, right? So that friction, that traction, I should say, that traction, that bite is what causes that bicycle to move, right? Similarly, in chanting, when we chant audibly with sound, that sound creates a certain vibration that has a bite, that has a locking effect that keeps the mind in one movement, in a convergent state, right? That locking in, that grasping is there of the sound to the mind so that the mind stays with that sound. Now, at some point, you can try to imagine this with the bicycle chain, right? Just imagine that the bicycle chain is so fluid now, it's moving like this so well that you could remove the wheels, right? Not the tires, but the wheels that are moving the chain itself. Of course, we can't actually do that, but imagine that the chain has now been locked in and moving in one way for so long that it now has its own motion, its own steadiness. And now, even if you don't pedal, that movement is going to continue. At least the movement of the bicycle will continue. Similarly, after chanting audibly, engaging that mind, right? Locking in the mind and keeping it moving in this particular direction, the mind creates or gathers its own stability. It's gliding on its own. And now that sound can be removed and the mind can continue deepening in its recognition. Cogs. Yes. Jesse and Spencer say cogs. Just like cogs. Right? So the sound of chanting, like when you chant Om. Om is a very particular sound. It has a certain catch to it, right? It's like acts as a cog that brings the mind into a particular state. And the more you chant it over and over, the more the mind changes into a particular configuration, into a particular state. And then when that cog is removed, the mind can maintain for a while. You'll see it happens for a while, right? And then it starts to lose its shape again. And once more, we have to pedal. The chanting starts again, right? This is the idea behind chanting in all religions, in all traditions. You know, japa, saying something over and over, repeating it, the rosary or the japamala, all the same mechanism of action, right? Bringing the mind into a particular state and then letting it go and seeing how much it can deepen and stabilize on its own. And when it starts destabilizing, once more bringing in the cog. All right, so is silent chanting more effective? Well, silent chanting, when it works, happens at a deeper level of the mind, right? The mind has to be prepared for that. Otherwise, sometimes the mind is doing 100 things and we're trying to chant silently. It doesn't have the same effect, right? Silent chanting should be in that rhythm, in that state of flow. And to get there, sometimes the audible chanting is required. So it depends on the state of the mind at that time. Once it stabilizes, yes, the silent chanting is more powerful, provided that the mind is that stable. And beyond that, the chanting falls away, right? Even that any kind of chanting falls away, whether it's silent or not. So take a deep breath and continue relaxing. And see if you can feel the awareness within and around us that is connecting all of us in this conversation. Right? Where is this conversation happening? Always a good question to reflect on. Okay. So why is the obsession with living longer? Is it the deceptive appearance of finality, fear of non-action, not knowing what follows, fear of no more life, no more love, no more fun? So why the obsession with living longer? Yeah. So at a fundamental level, at a non-thinking level, meaning prior to thought, not that we don't use thinking, but at the level of being that is prior to thought, prior to action, death itself has no meaning, right? Nor does birth, right? Birth and death begin to have meaning only when we start to talk about particular experiences. With respect to the experience of a body, there is something called birth, and there is something called death, right? With respect to, let's say, something I like a pen. There's the birth of that pen when I receive the pen, or when the pen is created in the manufacturing shop. And there's a death to that pen, the death of that pen, of that form, when it breaks, for example, or it decomposes. So birth and death have meaning relative to particular experiences, right? There is an aspect of what we are, not at the individual level, but still very much a part of our anatomy that is beyond particular experience, that we can say is birthless and deathless. It was never born and it will never die, because it is not a part of our anatomy that is in time. Time exists only relative to other experiences, which is why there is no experience of time in sleep. There are no other experiences for comparison to project the sense of distance or project the sense of duration, which is what space and time are. They're relative to our experience of distance and duration. Right? So this part of our anatomy that is prior to space and time, that is not individual, I'm not saying it's in a particular place in the body. I'm saying that the body is in it. Body is in it. So this particular part of us that everyone has access to, but we are not taught to recognize in the society, this gives the sensation that there is something more than this lifetime. Right? Now, whether this shows up in our thinking or not is different. Right? Many people will say, no, I don't feel like this is everything. I feel like there's more to life than this. I feel like there's more to me than this. That I'm not going to start a few decades ago, will end in a few decades. Right? Or this body, or these particular thoughts, or this particular mind. I feel like there's more. Other people will say, no, not at all. There's nothing like this. We start, we die, and that's the end of it. Either way, both of these depend on the experiences and the thoughts that this person was exposed to, right? Depending on what they have experienced in their life, and depending on what kind of thinking they've been exposed to, this will result, right? Whether they think there's such a thing or there's not such a thing beyond this lifetime. However, a person that moves into this and recognizes this aspect of what we are more will simply have this feeling. Right? Including people who are curious about life, whether it's philosophers or scientists or spiritual people or people who won't label themselves but are still just kind of curious, whatever we want to call such people. This sense will be there because they are getting in touch with this deeper aspect of what they are. So the sense will be there that there is something more. And when you know there is something more, it's difficult to say, well, this is just it, right? So this question was, no more life, no more experiences, no more fun, right? No more events, right? Why is this there? Well, it's because there is a sense that there is something fundamental beyond these experiences, beyond these passing events, whether they're fun or not, right? Whether they're painful or not, whether they're joyful or not, that there is more than these arising and subsiding waves of experience. And when that recognition is there, no matter if it's nonverbal, if it's prior to language, if it's not actively thought, but when this recognition or this feeling is there, the way that expresses is by this search, through this search. The way it expresses through the individual mind is through a search, right? Almost like a periscope coming up from the water and it's looking around, right? It wants to know what else is there. We know there's more than being submerged here. Coming up for fresh air, what else is around? It's kind of like that. The individual mind will go through science to figure out the nature of the world, right? We'll go through philosophy, we'll go through spirituality, we'll go through religion, we'll go through experimentation and mysticism and using mind-altering substances. It will go to great lengths and it will stop at nothing because it detects that there is something else, that there is something more. Right? It might not talk about it. It might not give words to it, but that internal movement is there. And going back to the previous question, a couple questions ago, it is that internal movement that will then determine what happens next. The desire for that brings that mind into an environment to experience what it wishes to know. Can you elaborate on the differences between believing and knowing? Okay. It fits in with what we were just talking about. Believing is a thought structure. Believing is somebody told me something, and now I have adopted it, and now I believe. It's a thought structure. Now, it can be reinforced by other experiences, by perceptions, by sensations. It can be reinforced. Yeah. But generally, there are fewer it can't stand criticism. Criticism, I don't mean calling it something bad. I mean critical thinking, looking at it closely. If it's a belief, it doesn't really want to be analyzed. It doesn't want to be looked at closely. Not just intellectually, but with our whole experience, our sensations, our prior experiences, talking to other people, experimenting in our own life. A belief cannot stand those kinds of assessments, right? A belief is something that we adopt and it's kind of standing by itself without being tested, right? As opposed to a knowing is willing to be tested, right? Whatever that belief is, over time, it gets tested through experiments, through what's happening in our life, through what we read, what we hear, what we associate with, and it remains. It remains. It's being confirmed by these, right? Not that we're ignoring the things that don't support the experience, not that we're tossing some things aside that we don't want to see, but no matter what comes, it seems to hold true. This becomes knowing. And this is no longer in the realm of thinking. Right? So something that is not restricted to thinking and something that stands up to whatever assessments and thinking and events happen, that is knowing. So that we are here, to use the words very loosely, that we are here is a kind of knowing. Right? Without getting into the particularities of what we refers to or what here refers to, the simple awareness of being is knowing. It cannot be contradicted by thought. Right? It illumines thought. Yes, I'm here. No, I'm not here. Both of those are secondary to the awareness that is. So a most fundamental kind of knowing is this awareness. In fact, there's no way to get prior to awareness, before awareness. Anything that we conceive of as prior to awareness has to be conceptual. Right? Even if we say that space was there before awareness, that has to be known only in awareness. So, the difference between believing and knowing is, one, whether it stands up to critical analysis, right? You will see some people don't want their beliefs questioned, right? My religion is better than yours. Your religion is better than mine. This philosophy is better than that, right? But don't want there to be any actual critical thinking about it, because it might be that there is some commonness behind all of this, right? But maybe in childhood we were raised in a particular way that this has to be the primary, right? So there are many reasons for belief not being analyzed. Knowing is compatible with and encourages critical analysis, experimentation, thinking, conversation, debate, rethinking, right? It doesn't mean one has to do those things. That's not what I'm saying. Not that one has to always be critically analyzing things, but there's no problem with that. Knowing is perfectly consistent with that. Right? Because if it doesn't stand up to it and if it doesn't make sense, then maybe it was a belief all along that was presenting itself as knowing. Right? So knowing is fearless. All right. Why do we get hung up on real or not real? Everything is real and not real. This is one thing we hear all the time, that this is reality and that is not reality. This is real and that is hallucination. Right? So how do we define real? What does the word real mean? It depends on what you use to define this word. And you'll see, I've seen many times in conversations that the word is used very loosely, real. It often has a very vague meaning of what most people think. This is real. What most people think qualifies as real for the very common use of the word reality. And we won't go into the details of perception and reality now. I think we've done some of that before. But suffice it to say that the world we perceive is an interpretation. We do not see the world as it is. If you and I look at the same thing, we will describe it slightly differently, right? Different species will see the world quite differently. And even beyond that, the very interpretation of forms has limitations associated with it. The very nature of light has limitations associated with it as we talk about it in relationship with perceiving this world, right? So what is real in Vedanta? Real is that which does not change, right? That which does not change in the past, present, or future. That which does not change, whether in the mind is in waking state, in the dreaming state, or in the sleeping state. Now imagine that definition of reality. It's an extremely high bar in terms of what would qualify as real. Something that neither changes in the past, present, nor future, right? Which means automatically this is outside of time, whatever reality is. And that which doesn't change in the waking, dream, or sleep. You can see time changes. When you're waking, sense of time is different from when you're dreaming, right? The waking world has different laws of physics than the dreaming world, which is different altogether from the sleeping world, if there even is a world. So something which is unchanging through sleep and dream and waking, and unchanging from the future to the present to the past. This, according to Vedanta, is what is real. So you can see it is not in the dependent interpreted world of forms and perception, which are considered modifications of reality. Right? So why do we get hung up on real or not real? It goes back to what we said before. There is a sense that there's more to this world than we recognize. And that's why we do science. That's why we do experiments. That's why we do philosophy. That's why there's meditation, right? Those are the realms that art and music look to explore, that poetry tries to sneak in between the words, right? That we are always asking, what is real and what more is there to what we call real, to this reality? And depending on who is asking the question and what group and what beliefs, that definition of real will be different. And it's very important because we often decide what is normal, what is okay in society based on our definitions of reality. So it becomes very important to recognize that there are different definitions of reality according to cultures, practices, traditions, social contexts. And so the practical, daily, casual use of the word reality has to be discerned from the deeper, more profound use of the word reality. We have to know which in which context. And the reason that we define these things differently, that real or not real, for example, why we're hung up on that, is because closing the gap between real and not real tells us more about the world we are in, right? If we understand, why am I defining this as real? This perceptual world is real, isn't it? We might have thought that for a while until we started looking into it and seeing that, well, it's actually interpretations of reflected light. There are actually much more subatomic particles, and now an entire world opens up. Well, wait a second, I thought this was real. How is that real? So now we're on the next track, right? Our definitions of real and unreal shift the more we learn. And reconciling these, ultimately, yes, getting to a place where both these words lose meaning, right? Because that mind has become subtle enough and is looking through all of the interpreted forms and functions. And there's no longer this need to dichotomize, to put one against the other, to contrast real and unreal, right? What is, is. Take a couple deep breaths. Keep relaxing into your awareness and into this broader awareness in which your awareness and my awareness and all individual functions of awareness arise and subside. Okay, we'll do this last question. Can I think more linearly about the first mind as subject-object differentiation, second mind as subject-object integration, and third mind as undifferentiated awareness prior to subject and object? Will moving between these configurations many times a day help me to thin the boundaries? Yes. Short answer is yes. So first mind is subject-object differentiation. So this body seeing this screen, subject and object. They're different, right? The body and the screen are different. The brain and the screen are different. That's that differentiation of the first mind. Particularity, subject-object integration as the second mind. Now here the subject is no longer, as the second mind, the subject is no longer the individual, no longer a witness. It is this broader field of consciousness, right? Which self-modifies as all particularity. So the self-modification as particularity there becomes the object, and the undifferentiated nature is the subject. So it's a very loose definition of subject-object, right? In fact, in many contexts, the comment would be that there is no subject and object. It is simply the subject. You can interpret it any way. But the nature of that subject has changed dramatically from the first mind perspective, where the subject is one distinct thing separated, different from other particularities. And then finally, the third mind, prior to differentiation. Yes, undifferentiated awareness. And yes, by the whole practice of mindfulness, reflection, meditation, even listening, hearing, attuning, attending, being, all of these refer to shifting these orientations, right? In a subtle way. It's not that they refer specifically to first mind, second mind, third mind. These are waypoints so that the first mind can start to maybe recognize a little bit about what we're talking about the map that we're creating here. These practices and shifting during the day, as you say in this question, will help to thin these boundaries, right? To see through these boundaries and see beyond these boundaries, and still be able to function through the boundaries, which is important. So with that, I'll read one paragraph and we'll finish off this chapter. This is chapter 4 of Is This a Dream? The book is available on Amazon. Where does consciousness go when I die? So I'll read this about reincarnation since this came up. I'll read these two paragraphs. Incarnation literally means in flesh or in the body. So an incarnation is when we assume a physical form. Reincarnation would then be leaving one form and taking on another. It would be transformation, right? Transformation. We already know that energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only be transferred or changed. But is that true of our bodily and mental forms as well? This is really a question about memory. Specifically, we're asking, did I have a form prior to the one I have now? When you woke up this morning, you didn't feel like you had reincarnated from yesterday. Why? Because you remembered the form you had yesterday. But what if you didn't remember yourself prior to today? How would you know whether you had reincarnated or simply sustained a memory loss? Right? Other than people in society telling you, them sharing their own stories from your own experience, how would you know whether you had reincarnated or simply sustained memory loss? You might believe reincarnation is absurd, but there would be no way to know without having any memories to draw on. Right? We can put it in a much simpler way. Let's say you were in another room before you came to this room, wherever you're watching this. Right? What if you had lost all memory prior to that? Whatever happened, hit the head or something else happened. So lost memories about the room that you were in before this. Does it mean that we reincarnated into this room? Depends on your interpretation, but many would say, no, it's not that there was a reincarnation. It's that that experience is no longer with us. There's a wall, and I can't see beyond this experience. It's just like a void. When I look and I want to see, I just see a void. There's nothing there. And therefore I assume there's no existence there, right? Because the light is not shining there. If we go into a dark room and expect to find something, we won't until we shine the light in that room and see. Similarly, the areas of the mind that extend prior to a birth and beyond a death are occluded, obscured, like a windshield is obscured, right? We might put all kinds of stuff on it so you can't see through it. Or if you park on a hot day in a parking lot, you see people obscure the windshield with something to prevent the light from coming in and heating up the car. Similarly, for a lifetime to be focused, to have attention on that, the before and after can be obscured so that the path will be this way. Just like a racehorse gets blinders to obscure left and right so that it'll keep going straight, right? But when light shines, then that windshield, the limits of that mind are no longer obscured. And then reincarnation is no longer a religious topic or a spiritual topic or a mystical topic. Just like today is Tuesday, Monday and Sunday are not mystical topics. They're not religious topics. They're just Sunday and Monday. And tomorrow being Wednesday and Thursday is not mystical or esoteric, right? We don't have to talk about it secretly or in funny ways. Why? Because the light of our awareness shines on those experiences as well. If there are further questions, let me know. We can fill them in here and we will take those next time. We'll start with the chapter on meditation next time. And maybe we will do a longer meditation. Since we'll be talking about meditation, we will do a little bit longer of a meditation as well. Let's take a minute here. Take some full breaths and relax into the space around this body. And through this body. I will see you next week.